What is going on, my friends? I want to thank you for stopping by. You got Sturkules here with a video I've been really excited to do for a really long time, being my Avatar Pokemon team. Now, when I say Avatar, I'm talking The Last Airbender. I'm talking The Legend of Korra. I'm not talking the weird blue people whose ponytails stuck into things and did weird things. No, we're talking about the Avatar that I loved and grew up with. Now, you've probably seen Pokemon Avatar videos all over YouTube, and to be fair, most of them are really good. I'm kind of taking a different way from the other videos I've seen. A lot of the videos would take a character and give them a team, which was really cool. I'm going to be more finding a representative to kind of cover each different area in the Avatar universe and making a team of 6 out of that, because as you know, when you start your Pokemon journey, one of the most exciting things to do in each new game is to find out who is going to be my team of 6. Who am I going to fill it out with? Is there anything along the way that I'm going to love so much that I just have to have? And it caps off at 6, so that's what we're going to be doing as well, with 4 of the obvious choices being water, fire, earth, and air, right? The water tribes, the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, and the Air Nomads. I'm so glad I got that right. I was scared to mess that up. But what do we do for the other 2? Do we try to take one of the kind of minor things that are bent from the other nations? That doesn't seem very even because they'd fall under that. But I was thinking we could use non-benders and we could have an avatar on our team. And I think that would be a lot of fun. There are obviously other ways you could go with that, but these are the 6 I chose. So let's just go ahead and hop into things. They're not going to be in the order pictured here because we are starting with fire. Now first, let's think about what goes into being a firebender. You think of how they fight, you think of the power, the force behind it, the anger used, or even the passion used to give stronger fire. You might think of the fact that a lot of them were able to bend electricity, which was so cool, or lightning bend, whatever you want to call it. They could even redirect lightning, some of them who weren't able to master using it. Some of them could almost kind of use it to make themselves fly like a jetpack. Some could use psychic powers to make combustions happen. That was pretty rare though. And then like the inspiration that was taken from dragons. Dragons were essentially the OG firebenders, so they could learn techniques from dragons if they were lucky enough to run into them and kind of learn to do different fire techniques from that. So some of the attributes we see here are fire, lightning, combustion, which could be put with maybe psychic, dragon, flying, and possibly even dark, because all throughout the first series it seemed like the firebenders were the bad guys, and that they kind of had this label, this negative thing with them. Now, we saw throughout the second series that that wasn't necessarily always the case. A lot of times, a lot of the firebenders turned out to be good. They were just raised in a wrong nation. So, looking at that, let's just look at a few Pokemon here. Could Rotom Heat be a good one? Rotom Heat is the only fire and electric Pokemon that I can think of off the top of my head in existence. And a lot of firebenders had that control over lightning. So, is this the right way to go? Something else you could think about would be something like Magmortar. Now, Magmortar has the fire cannons, so just the ease of being able to expel and fight with fire seems pretty fitting. It does kind of have a lizard, draconic type look, also with kind of like a dark, menacing face. But also it does get the move Thunderbolt that a lot of people use with it. That kind of gives the feeling of that control over lightning or electricity. Turtonator being one of the only fire and dragon Pokemon in existence. The other one being Reshiram or Mega Charizard X. Reshiram is a legendary. We're not going to be using legendaries for our elemental types because that just seems too easy. But you could go with something like Charizard, which has 2 Mega Forms. Not only are its Mega Forms really cool, but they're very fitting for firebending because one is Fire and Dragon, and the other one gets the ability Drought that literally brings out the sun, which boosts Fire-type moves, which we know the sun and comets and different things like that were also different things were used to boost fire attacks in the Avatar universe. Something like Incineroar, possibly because it was fire and dark, has that darkness to it that we saw in a lot of the first series. Something like Blaziken or Infernape, having the great fighting techniques going along with fire. Being able to learn Thunder Punch gives the electric usage that you get from lightning bending, so they could be very cool. So looking at that, these are kind of our options for fire. So looking back at our attributes, the ones that really stick out to me are usage of fire and usage of lightning, though I put an asterisk with lightning because I don't think every firebender that was a great firebender had to really be able to use lightning. It was just a really nice thing. So with that being said, I went with Magmortar. I think Magmortar is a really great representation just because of how easily it could spout fire out of its hands. It seems to have a very offensive strike first type of feel to it, and that usage of being able to use Thunderbolt while not being an electric type was big for me. I think Infernape was a really cool backup pick, and actually looking back, Charizard might even be a better backup, but here you got two amazing candidates that also like have that firebender type of feel to them. So going in next, we're going to be looking at water bending. Now when you look at the water bending, I think it's just something that's extremely graceful to it. So that's something I kind of want to look for. Being able to use ice is kind of just second nature to a waterbender. Water and ice almost kind of feel like the same type of thing in the Avatar universe. It's almost built in their DNA to be able to have use over both. We saw waterbenders. Now to me that looks a lot like a Tangrowth, which is obviously not a water type, but waterbenders could sometimes take control over vines. They called it swamp bending, so is grass something we should consider? A big part of being a waterbender was healing. Now in the culture, it was initially meant that women were to be healers and men were to be warriors, and obviously Katara played a huge part in rightfully tearing that down and letting people just be themselves. But with that being said, healing's still a very important part of waterbending, as it's something that comes in huge use throughout both series. Also bloodbending being one of the more amazing but also like spooky for a kids show part of waterbending. Does psychic go into this? So seeing the attributes water, ice, grass, psychic, and healing are all just big things that come to mind that I think we should be looking at. Ludicolo is a water and grass type. Does that mean it could fit since it would have control over both things and usage of the other types? Primarina has certainly that graceful type of feel, the fairy making you think, could that go with some sort of healing? And it does have a wide range of moves that could cover things like ice, like psychic within it. Starmie, once again, being very graceful, having the natural cure ability, which I think helps with the healing type of thing, but also having the psychic ability tacked on when it seems like a lot of waterbending techniques are drawn back to psychic, like blood bending, like healing. Something like Golduck, it's weird to think of Golduck as graceful, ever coming from something derpy like Psyduck, but it does seem to have a kind of a graceful type of thing to it when it fights, and it is able to use both water and psychic moves. Milotic is just kind of the embodiment of a graceful looking water type Pokemon, though it not having limbs, I think kind of makes it kind of an awkward choice. Vaporeon, being a Pokemon that can literally just kind of melt into water, kind of has a very big embodiment of water. Also being known as a healing and cleric type of Pokemon makes it a pretty strong choice. And then Lapras is a strong choice, despite not being super land focused. It would, I think, be able to move on land, and it does have limbs. And something that makes a huge case for it is it's both water and ice type. And when you look at the northern and southern water tribe, it seems like both water and ice are just very important to the identity of a complete waterbender. Plus it does have cleric options and pretty good coverage that I think could go with that. So with that being said, to go back real quick and look at some of the attributes, I think water, ice, and healing are what really stick out to me. And I gotta say, this might be unpopular, but I think I'd go with Lapras here. Just the fact that it really does have the water and ice type in its nature. This seemed like the best water-ice option to be able to use. Something like Cloyster not having limbs, something like Walrein just not feeling like a very graceful Pokemon. But I do think that if you went with Vaporeon, that is a great second option, and you have an argument that it could be just as good of a use as Lapras. I just personally wanted to go with Lapras for the feel it gave off. Next up, we got Earthbending, and bending in the show was very diverse because there were so many different types of things. Like, you think of them just throwing rocks around, but they could also bend many different types of things from the earth. That right there is coal. You had meteorites. You had the earth type of discs that they'd use in the pro bending. We'd see them literally just kind of able to make earthquakes through their sheer strength and control of the earth. We saw a very big focus on wrestling and kind of that being a style of fighting that was really important for earthbending. We saw that Toph and her descendants were able to kind of even just feel through the ground, almost like a psychic power type of feel, but not really because it was more feeling based. But then there was even things like sand bending and the ever popular and awesome metal bending that Toph created that many throughout the rest of earthbending history were able to master. It almost became second nature to a lot of earthbenders. And then there was magma bending, and while this was one of the coolest things, it really infringed on firebending, and it was very rare. I believe these are the only two we knew of that were able to do that technique. So you could see a lot of things: ground, rock, steel, wrestling kind of going with fighting, and magma kind of going with fire. Something to think about with an earthbender is that ground and rock are kind of essentially the same thing in this universe, which in the Pokemon universe I think they should have been anyway. I always thought it was weird that both types existed, but that's neither here nor there. What is here or there is the fact that ground and rock basically are just kind of used as the same type of thing. So that's just something to consider as we go forward. One great obvious choice here would be Excadrill. Being ground, but also having the steel typing, this kind of just looks like your standard Earthbender and Metalbender. You could also go with Steelix, but Steelix doesn't have that feel of being able to like fight and move around as agile as something like a human does when they fight. Tyranitar looks like it's just this amazing mountain of rocks that is just built with such force and power, and not to mention that it brings Sandstream. When it comes into battle, that just seems like something an Earthbender would be able to control. Something like Crocodile I think could be really cool, but I think Tyranitar is a better choice with its sturdiness. Something like Nidoking and Nidoqueen could be cool, just because they do, once again, have this feel of being able to like almost like fight in a humanoid type of way with control over the ground, but that poison typing being such a huge part of what makes them is kind of problematic because that doesn't really have much of a tie back in to Earthbending. I think Rhyhorn or Rhydon or Rhyperior would both make an amazing choice for an Earthbender, being both rock and ground type, which are essentially one and the same in the Avatar universe. Being able to kind of move in that humanoid type of way and just have such huge strength, being able to take a hit and this sturdy nature that a lot of Earthbenders seem to be able to do and then dish one back seems to go really well with them. And then Camerupt, just because I felt like something had to represent the magma bending, and this seemed like the best choice. And then Garchomp, just because I know Garchomp is very beloved. It is a very powerful ground type that does seem to have a lot of control over different types. Having the ability when it megas Sand Force, which boosts both rock, steel, and ground type moves, could be something that kind of goes along with that. And then Aggron being a good choice, kind of like a counterpart to Excadrill as a choice here, being steel and rock, being more of a sturdy and less offensive type of thing. So these are all very good things that we could take into account, though I think Camerupt and Nidoking are not quite as strong here. Of choices. Now looking again at the attributes, what I think really matters is ground and rock, and in a big way steel, but steel kind of in the way that electric mattered with fire, and that I don't think it needs to be a steel type. Having some sort of use over the steel type is enough, because when you think about it, a lot of the good Earthbenders couldn't metal bend, though it was pretty common still. I went with Rhyperior. I think a lot of people are going to dislike that because a lot of people don't like Rhyperior's design, but I think when you look at the way it fights, its signature move Rock Wrecker just reminds me so much of an Earthbender in the way they move and fight. I think Rhydon would be just as good of a choice if you like its design better. And then obviously Excadrill is an amazing second option. If you're not huge on my Rhyperior pick, it does go well, as it does look a ton like a Badger Mole, which was the original type of Earthbender that they learned from. Now with air, something interesting to think about is that, well, they kind of just airbend, right? Like they don't have a ton of different types of elements that go into air. Air is just kind of air, it's wind. They kind of make something out of nothing with the air around them, but they do have different techniques that they can use. They have different ways they can attack with the wind, whether it's pushing things, whether it's using it to like make a blade and cut through something with fast winds, whether it's to use air to ride around on like an air scooter, whether it's something legendary like fart bending, which was awesome, or we saw Zahir being able to do something that was essentially just taking the air, taking the breath out of someone's body and thus taking their life away, which once again, super spooky for a kid's show, but also was really kind of cool to see. But then we also saw Zahir, which leads into the next thing, was able to essentially fly by separating himself from the earth as an airbender. And not only did that take control from the air, but it was really more from like a spiritual perspective of being able to do that. And for an airbender, it was very important for them to have this meditative type of personality. That was a very big part of them. Having that spiritual awareness and that power to connect with the spiritual realm was very important for airbenders. Not to say other nations couldn't do that, but to them, it just kind of seemed like it was a bigger deal. So looking at attributes, you could see maybe flying going along with the wind, obviously. Meditation, maybe drawing a little bit from psychic. Spirituality, maybe coming from ghost or fairy. When you saw in the Legend of Korra, when they'd go into the spiritual world, a lot of the, I guess, beasts or beings they'd come across had a ghost or fairy type feel, like almost like, was this even real? So anyway, looking at that, pure flying types, are limited. And even though pure flying feels like it would fit an airbender really well, we can't use Tornadus, that's a legendary. So we're stuck with Rookidee or Corvisquire, which, not being fully evolved, just don't have that great feel for what we're looking for. You could go with one of the more powerful fully evolved regional birds that can take control of things like Hurricane or Brave Bird, using different types of what would be considered air or flying or bird. Whatever went in with the flying type in Pokemon could be pretty cool, and they were fast and agile like a lot of airbenders. You could look at something like Farfetch'd. Why, you ask? Because his leak kind of looks like the staff they'd fly around on. That's literally it. It's really not that great of a choice. Something like Noivern kind of came to mind because it is a primary flying type. Being flying and dragon, it does seem to have good control over the air, being able to use like Hurricane, Air Slash. I think it gets Tailwind, it gets Defog. Things like that seem pretty important. It is powerful, does have this kind of like almost rare type of feeling, but it's also very tied in with sound, and I just feel like that doesn't tie in much with airbending, but it's still a possibility. Something like Xatu, which I accidentally clicked to earlier, I think is good because Xatu does seem like one of the most meditative Pokemon. That's also a flying type, but it's often seeing into the future. It's almost like it's there, but it's also like off somewhere else, and that kind of makes me think of how an airbender oftentimes like is kind of there, but also if they're meditating, they're kind of trying to go somewhere else to the spirit world. Something like Sigilif having this ancient type of feel to it can be kind of cool because the airbenders were almost extinct at one point and basically were considered a thing of the past, but also being psychic and flying types that fit well with that. Swoobat being another psychic and flying type, but really it's just kind of cute like Aang or Momo. It doesn't really have much else going for it other than that. You could think of Oricorio having the ghost and psychic type forms going with the flying type, but they also have the electric and fire forms, so that almost ties it just as much to the Fire Nation. Something like Drifblim is that interesting. It's a ghost and flying type, so maybe it does have that spirit realm type of feel, but Drifloon tries to like carry kids off away from their world, which just seems kind of dark and mean like a lot of ghost types, so I really feel like that's not the best fit for like a monk do good to others type of thing. And then something that really comes to mind could be the Togekiss line. It's said that Togekiss, Togetic, Togepi are really supposed to only appear to those who are pure of heart. A Togepi is only supposed to hatch for those who are pure of heart. They used to be normal flying, and now they are fairy flying, so I think those types are pretty well fitting. So that, looking at the airbenders, what's really important out of this I think is the flying and the spirituality. And with that being said, I think Togekiss is just the best choice based off of these things because of how good it is supposed to be, because of the power it does have over air, over flying, and it does almost like, it starts off as Togepi, then Togetic, it's kind of more so becoming like a bird able to fly, and then Togekiss just kind of full on accepts being a flying type. So I don't know, I think that's kind of like a cool little evolution to kind of show maybe the life of an airbender. I think Xatu is an okay secondary choice because of the meditative side it has, but really that's just pretty much it. Also, that GIF is super creepy. It doesn't do much justice for an airbender. So that's who I'd go with. Next up we have our non-benders, and most of them fought in different ways. They didn't have these special powers, but some of them were still able to be pretty powerful, right? Sokka and his trusty boomerang, or he was taught to sword fight by a great sword master. Someone like the Kyoshi Warriors, not only were they great in hand-to-hand combat, but they were also able to make use of weapons really well. Even like those little fans they had, they could use as a weapon. Mei and her ability to just throw knives with such amazing precision on top of just being a good fighter. Someone like Ty Lee, who not only was a huge acrobat, I don't know why I said huge, a very gifted acrobat, but also her ability to chi block and essentially take away people's bending powers and kind of almost give them in a little state of paralysis, and that spread to many benders throughout time. We saw were able to use that technique to very big success, and then we saw someone like, I think this guy was called like the General or something like that. Anyway, he used weaponry but was also able to use them towards chi blocking. Someone like Asami, she was not only a gifted fighter in hand-to-hand combat, but she was also very good at using man-made technology to be able to fight against benders. And then her father or other creators who were able to make machinery that were able to combat benders. So looking at the attributes, you could see like a normal type of fighting, like just the normal type. You could look at advanced fighting and martial arts, like fighting. You could look at use of weaponry, maybe going with steel type. And then you could look at like fighting dirty, like dark. Now, chi blocking might not necessarily be fighting dirty, but it's fighting in like a different, unexpected way, which is kind of almost like what the dark fighting type is. So Lucario is something we could consider. Not only is it a fighting type, but it being steel type kind of makes use of the weaponry around it. So does that make it something like Sokka, who could use his boomerangs and his swords, or something like Aegislash? Now, the typing doesn't really seem to fit super well for a non-bender, but it's literally a weapon, which is what a lot of them used to fight. Something like Conkeldurr being not only a fighting type, but also shows good ability to be able to use weaponry. Something like Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, Hitmontop, different types of fighting are shown through them, which I think is very cool. Something like Scrafty being fighting in dark, talking about two of the types we talked about earlier, plus the fun little mohawk that kind of reminds me of Sokka's pulled back hair. That's nothing, I don't know. Mienshao, I think, is an amazing Pokemon for us to look at for this, being a pure fighting type, but also being very acrobatic and agile, being able to use moves like close combat, like high jump kick, like acrobatics, like U-turn or knockoff. I think just has a lot going for it that goes a lot with what was expected to be able to fight in hand-to-hand combat and to be able to use chi blocking and different types of things like that. Beware does have the normal and fighting types, which are two of the things we looked at. It's very strong, but it does seem like it'd be kind of slow and awkward and not necessarily fit the type of fighting that was used. Obstagoon having the normal type, maybe being able to do that a little better, and having the dark type, maybe that understanding of the cheap and unexpected type of fighting. And then Cinccino, for the same reason as Mienshao, I think just would be a very smart fighter, having abilities such as Skill Link or Technician, making the most of very just smart strikes and being able to fight very smartly and make the most of its opportunities, along with being very agile and fast, packing a big punch in a small package. So here's a lot of the good things that I think we could take from. Now, looking real quick at a non-bender, I think normal fighting and advanced fighting / martial arts is the most important part to take from this. So with that being said, I think Mienshao is the best Pokemon we could use in this situation. Once again, just even seeing how it runs looks like it's an anime protagonist here, right? But having that humanoid type of feel, but also just being able to fight in so many different ways that are just very effective. I think Lucario is also a very good choice, but since it does seem to have a lot of like mystical powers, its main move being Aura Sphere, but also being able to learn moves like Dark Pulse, being able to learn moves like Dragon Pulse or Water Pulse, seems to be that it almost has like a little too much power to be a non-bender. For the avatar, we might need to shake things up a little bit. Now, I do think that we should still look at every type of Pokemon, but I think looking at mythicals, legendaries, and pseudo-legendaries might make actually a little bit of sense here, because this is supposed to be a little bit more special. Now, the first thing we know about an avatar is they do need to be able to bend all 4 elements. I would consider an avatar that could only bend 2 or 3 elements not to truly be the avatar yet, right? So that's something we need to look at. We need to look at the fact that it makes them so powerful they can even use like multiple elements at once. Power to be able to preserve themselves or to be able to use a different level of strength that they weren't previously able to use going into the avatar state. And then also it was important to know about the avatar's ability to bend energy, to even take bending away from someone, just being that in touch with the elements in the universe, adding that extra layer of power to them. And then the obvious fact that the avatar is kind of a mix of like, it was a mix of like a normal person and the spirit Rava from the spirit world fighting the ultimate evil of Vatu, kind of going together with the person. I think goes towards their spiritual but also legendary type of feel. So obviously the elements are important. Being able to go into the avatar state with the spiritual side is important, and having a rare and legendary feel type to them. That doesn't mean they have to be a legendary Pokemon. The first thing that comes to mind is Mew, because it's literally probably the most versatile Pokemon in the world. It can do a little bit of everything. It can learn so many different types of moves and serve so many different roles, and it does have that rare, mythical, and mystical feel to it. But is it a little bit too rare? Because, I mean, we could also think about the other, like, Pixie type of mythical Pokemon. but the mythicals are just so rarely seen. The Avatar is supposed to be around in the world, and it's supposed to be there at all times. When the Avatar dies, the next Avatar is born to a different nation. So are they a little bit too rare and a little bit too hard to access to be the Avatar? What about something like Arceus, literally the most powerful Pokemon, the most powerful being in the world? The Avatar is supposed to be the most powerful, but Arceus in the Pokemon lore created everything. The Avatar was given their powers by something else that was almost a higher power, so I think maybe we shouldn't use that. But that could lead us to Silvally. Now, Silvally, like Arceus, could become any type of Pokemon. Its ability, the RKS system, is literally based off of Arceus. And it does have this cool thing about it that it kind of represents each of the nations. Silvally's top head part kind of almost seems bird-like, which makes me think of the Air Nation. Its tail fin makes me think of the Water Nation. Its front legs look draconic, which make me think of the Fire Nation. And then its body and back legs being kind of more powerful and beastly remind me of something that lives on the Earth, like the Earth Nation, having that sturdy and powerness, that's not a word, to them. So I think Silvally is a great option because of that. And it seems to be one of the less rare legendaries, so it has this rareness to it, but it does seem pretty accessible, which I think is cool. Do we consider something like Nidoking and Lucario that have already been considered, that just have such wide move pools that they can kind of touch into each nation? I think they shouldn't be deeply considered just because they're not quite rare enough. They're a little too common. But what about something like Dragonite? You're hard-pressed to find a Pokemon with more type coverage in its move pool than Dragonite, both through its level up move pool and through TMs and TRs that it can learn. So I think that in itself makes Dragonite very good, and it just does have like a lot of aspects from the nations. Like, they like to live in water, but they can also fly and live in the air. They're very powerful and can shake the ground with their attacks, and it being a dragon is a natural thing to be able to use fire. So Dragonite does cover a lot of the bases, as does something like Salamence, but it doesn't have quite the coverage or diverse feel that I think Dragonite has. What about something like Wigglytuff or Clefairy? They have a lot of type coverage, and I mean, Wigglytuff is rumored to have been from space. That gives kind of a mystical feel. So you could consider, I think Clefable, I said Clefairy, you could consider Clefable as a good option, maybe not so much Wigglytuff. What about something like Gyarados? Once again, has a very wide move pool, does seem to live in the water and the air, so it has that different nation kind of feel to it. It starts as a little Magikarp and becomes something big and amazing. Maybe that's a possibility. And then the last one that I think is really interesting is Rotom. Rotom takes on its different forms and is able to do different things. It's almost how the Avatar goes from nation to nation through its life cycle. Rotom can become a water type. It can become a fire type. There's the Water and Fire Nation. Ice, obviously, going with the Water Nation. Flying, going with the Air Nation. Grass is technically Water Nation, but I mean, it's a lawnmower. It works on the ground, on the earth. It's a stretch, I get it. But I think that actually makes Rotom a pretty cool type to consider. So when looking at the Avatar, I think these are the 5 best choices. I think Mew is just a little bit too mythical, per se. So let's look at the other 4. Looking at the attributes, all of them are important. If you're the Avatar, you can't really leave anything off, right? That wouldn't make sense. So I think you have to have all of these attributes be important to you. With that being said, I would personally go with Silvally. Now, that is a legendary Pokemon. You can't get it in every game. I do get that, but I don't know. There's just something about its build that I think perfectly covers almost every nation. But if you're not a big fan of that, I think Dragonite is also a fantastic choice, and it really does have a little bit of every nation in it, so you can't go wrong with that. So this is kind of the Avatar team I came up with. My water type being Lapras, fire being Magmortar, my earth being Rhyperior, my air being Togekiss, my Avatar being Silvally. I think I've been saying it wrong. A lot of people say it's Silvally, which makes sense too. Either way. And then in the non-bender being Mienshao. So looking at that, I think it's a pretty solid list. I think it covers all the bases, and it kind of reminds me of the different things that are important to all the different types of people or nations throughout the Avatar universe. Now, my backups, I think, make an okay team too. Something like Vaporeon, Excadrill, Infernape or Charizard, Xatu, Dragonite, and then Lucario, or even something maybe like Obstagoon or Chinchino, I think make good choices. So with that being said, you see the teams I came up with. I want to see what you would come up with. I legitimately want to see what do you think would be the best representative of each nation. And is that how you do it, or would you take away Avatar and Non-Bender and add in some other sort of groups that could be covered? So in the comments below, I'd love to see your thoughts and have some really fun conversations on this. If you did enjoy the video, please do leave a like, maybe even share it around so that other people can see it. If you're not yet subscribed, that would make me feel great if you would subscribe. But if nothing else, I really just hope that you have yourself a great night, and I do want to thank you again for stopping by. Peace.